the RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan announced that the Wu-Tang is taking their final tour, or rather a farewell tour, and it's going to be called Wu-Tang Forever, the Final Chamber. And, you know, Wu-Tang, and RZA mentions this in his podcast appearance for the podcast Popcast. He mentions that the Wu-Tang was never really a touring band. They recently went on the New York State of Mind tour with Nas, but before that, they had foregone and walked off of their biggest tour opportunity. This was back just after the release of their mega double album, Wu-Tang Forever, in 1997. They were supposed to tour with Rage Against the Machine, and this was pretty much at the height of the Wu-Tang's popularity. They left the tour, and RZA pretty much, he often laments, or maybe laments isn't the right word, but he reflects. He definitely reflects on the missed opportunity and just kind of chalks it up to not everybody from the clan being ready for that type of scale or magnitude of that tour at the time. And I would say that, you know, after the Wu-Tang dropped their groundbreaking debut album as a collective, 36 Chambers, they then had a series of super successful and a couple classic solo albums from some of the most prominent members. It went Method Man in 94, Old Dirty Bastard in 95, along with Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links in 95. At the end of 95 was the GZA's Liquid Swords. And then in 96, Ghostface Killah's debut Iron Man. They were just rattling off these solo debut albums. And I know the GZA had Words from the Genius prior to that, but I'm talking about since the formation of the Wu-Tang Clan. But I would say that as things kind of built up to 97's Wu-Tang Forever double album release, basically the group's sophomore album, yes, they did have some successful releases after that, like, you know, RZA's Bobby Digital album was in 98. They had a couple cool affiliate groups and albums. Killer Army dropped a couple really good ones. Sons of Man and Killer Priest from Sons of Man both had pretty good albums. I especially like Killer Priest's Heavy Mental. And of course, at the end of 99, or was it the very beginning of 2000, one or the other, Ghostface Killah dropped his sophomore album, Supreme Clientele. That's also, you know, set to be a classic. And you added some other good stuff, Capadonna's The Pillage. But I would say that after 98, the Wu-Tang's collective popularity and just the vibe of them kind of moving as a unit, as a collective, where, you know, you've got the RZA doing most of the beats. You also had True Master, Mathematics, Fourth Disciple, who are all really, really good producers, by the way. But you got a sense that the family unit feeling kind of wore off around the time of 98, and they never really kind of regained that type of traction. When they would tour, it would be like a few members here, few members there, but it was nothing that really signified the magnitude of the band and of the brand, as RZA puts it. There was not a tour that did the Wu-Tang Clan's legacy justice. So RZA basically started looking in the rear view, started thinking of how he could better tell the Wu-Tang story, because I think he had mentioned that he watched that, remember that Hip Hop Evolution documentary series, which I thought was really, really good. And I thought that they were pretty fair in how they were covering the different regions and the different movements throughout the timeline of hip hop. But RZA, I guess, took issue with parts of the story not being told. So he's like, nah, I gotta tell it my way. I can't leave it to others to do the Wu-Tang justice. So what does he do? He produces that Of Mics and Men documentary series. Remember that Wu-Tang documentary? And then at the same time, he spins off the fictional TV series of the Wu-Tang. So he's got both of those kind of telling the Wu story. And then he puts together, or helps put together, the New York State of Mind tour with Nas. Now, in that tour, Method Man missed big chunks of the tour. The GZA was in and out of the tour, so you still didn't get like the full Wu-Tang. But this was the closest you got to it. And again, this was a co-headlining tour with Nas. I think Busta Rhymes also joined them on the tour. But that was the closest you got to a tour that reflected how meaningful of a group and of a brand Wu-Tang has been to hip hop and to music and to pop culture, quite frankly. And then after that tour, the Wu-Tang has their Las Vegas residency. So it was pretty much one step before the other. It was the documentary series, then it was the TV show, then it was the New York State of Mind tour, then it was the Las Vegas residency, and now RZA feels like now is the time to have this Wu-Tang Forever, the Final Chamber tour. And he said that every member has agreed to it. Now, obviously, the Old Dirty Bastard passed away, but it's going to be his son that's going to be taking his place on the tour. And if you were wondering, yes, Capadonna, who there's always debate, is Capadonna? Yeah, Capadonna's pretty much an official member. He didn't seem to be at the time of the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers release, but all the evidence since that has pretty much pointed to, yeah, Capadonna is a member of the Wu. I think he was just in jail at the time when they were building that debut album. But I mean, you look at his work with Ghostface Killah on Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links, and he's been as involved. Like, look at Wu-Tang Forever and look at how many tracks he's on. He's basically on that album as much as pretty much any other member in the group, although it does say on the back of the CD featuring Capadonna, but that was just for contractual and label reasons. But for all intents and purposes, yeah, Capadonna is a member of the Wu, and yes, he is going to be on this tour. So you've basically got the whole, at least all of the surviving Wu-Tang members on this tour, which is really, it's kind of a first. And, you know, RZA's been very transparent about how difficult it is, you know, to be the Abbott going forward, because he said that the group all agreed to a 5-year plan. This was like in 92. So from 92 to 97, then once 97 hit, the dictatorship kind of changes dynamic and everybody's free to do their own thing beyond that point. So it's been very tough, especially because everybody has their own business interests, has their own managers, their own teams, their own visions in mind. So it's been very difficult over the decades, really, to get everybody on the same page. But here we are. It looks like the Wu-Tang Forever, the Final Chamber tour, is about to happen. And the one thing that I'm wondering about this, I get wanting to have a tour that truly reflects the massiveness of the Wu-Tang Clan, but why is this the Final Chamber? And, you know, I was asking, you know, my homies this, and I was asking around, and, you know, some people pointed to some interesting theories. My brother said, yeah, it's the Final Chamber if the tour doesn't go well. But he also said that my brother, has been to like 3 different Elton John shows over the past few years, all of which were supposedly a part of this final tour. So sometimes you see like an extended final tour, or you'll see an artist announce that this is their final tour and then it ends up not being their final tour. So maybe there is some of that. Maybe this is like a trial run. Like, can we get this together, and how successfully can we carry out this tour? There are a lot of, you know, big egos and big personalities. Yes, everybody's older, so I'm sure that it hopefully would be easier now that everybody's like in their 40s or 50s than it was when they were in their 20s or 30s. But we'll see. Hopefully this goes on without a hitch. But I just wonder why the idea behind this is the Final Chamber. Like, you would think that, I mean, you look at a lot of like rock and roll bands, look at the Eagles, look at, you know, Bon Jovi, look at so many different artists from the rock and roll space, and even some from the R&B space. Although I have my own opinion in theory on how a lot of R&B and hip hop artists are treated after their prime, whether they are as embraced by as large an audience. But, you know, you do see a lot of successful R&B acts touring into their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. Like, you do get a lot of successful cases of that. I mean, hell, Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, Maurice White, you know, the founder of Earth, Wind, and Fire, died a few years ago, but Earth, Wind, and Fire is still touring. You know, Philip Bailey and Verdine White and company. So you do get a lot of instances in a lot of artists who are basically able to make money off of their catalog and off of their touring well past their, you know, their prime, their group's actual expiration date in releasing new music that is attractive to the public, right? I mean, Wu-Tang has had a few albums that didn't really do much. Yes, there has been that Once Upon a Time in Shaolin album that Martin Shkreli purchased, or, you know, he won in the auction, and then there's been a lot of controversy behind it, but we still want to hear that whole album. But the albums that they had before that, basically everything after Wu-Tang Forever, even though I kind of like the W, not as much as their first two, not anywhere near as much as their first two, and I probably like their next one, Iron Flag from 2001, more than the W. I kind of like the Iron Flag, way different than their first two again, but I like the Iron Flag. And, you know, Wu-Tang Forever wasn't a perfect album. It wasn't nearly as good as Enter the 36 Chambers. There's a lot of good stuff, but it's a big double album, so there's a lot of stuff on there as well, or at least stuff that isn't as good as, you know, your classic Wu-Tang material. But everything after that 2001 Iron Flag album, I'm talking 8 Diagrams, 2007, A Better Tomorrow from 2014, you could tell that not everybody was on the same page. It sounds like a lot of the stuff was kind of canned or phoned in. The verses aren't as good, the beats aren't as good, and you could tell that there's no camaraderie or accepted themes on any of these songs. Now, granted, there have been a lot of Wu-Tang songs where it seems like everybody's kind of doing their own thing on the verse, where it's like, yo, did you even hear your group member's verse before you created your verse? There's always been some of that, basically ever since, I would say, 95. I feel like from 93 to 95, they were on the same page. They had it together. 96 Ghostface album, pretty much the same, but from 97 on, it's kind of like, what are we doing? Are we moving as a unit? But yeah, I would say, especially after Iron Flag, even though on the charts, 8 Diagrams technically did better than Iron Flag, but basically into the 2000s, the fanfare around the new releases has not been nearly what it was in the 90s. But that doesn't mean that this group can't continue to tour, because again, you've got so many members who've got so much good solo material. So you could switch up and vary up the set list, do a few Wu songs, do a few, Ghost Ray songs. And a lot of these songs, a lot of the classics have featured verses from other members. Like if you do the GZA's Shadowboxing, you've got a Method Man verse kicking that off. If you do the GZA's, the 4th or the 7th chamber, you've got Killer Priest, you've got Ghostface. So yeah, I'm curious to see how this tour is gonna go. I'm probably gonna try to get a ticket, but again, I just don't understand the branding and the marketing around this being the final chamber. Maybe they're putting it out there to get everybody to feel like, hey, this might be the last time we ever see them come to our city. In fact, RZA said in that podcast interview, he's like, yeah, we ain't coming to your city as a unit, in the flesh, in the physical again. So this really might be their final tour. But I just suspect that if they have massive success, like if this tour does really, really well, I could see them doing it again in about 3 to 4 years or something. Why not? If you got a brand this successful, yes, Method Man's got an acting career and you got different members doing different things, but I think that you've got certain members who are more reliant on doing this tour than some of the other members. I'm sure they all make their own money. I'm quite confident of that, or at least I hope that that's the case, but not everybody has an acting career like Method Man, right? Not everybody's got as deep a catalog as Ghostface Killah. Not everybody has scored films and done all this production like the RZA. So you've got varying degrees of self-sovereign wealth among the members. So maybe that's also something. I mean, RZA did say that there is a hierarchy in the clan, right? So there is that to consider when you think about, okay, how viable is this after this final chamber tour, the idea and the likeliness of them doing it again, even if it's successful. I hope that this is the start of something rather than the end of something. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this Wu-Tang Forever, the final chamber tour. Give that RZA interview on the I think it's called Popcast. Give that a listen. And I also listened to the RZA's Questlove interview. It's on Questlove's podcast, Questlove Supreme. Great interview. It's a 2-part interview. Really, I would urge you to check that out. Questlove's podcast featuring the RZA. Please give that a listen. And let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love hip hop like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.